The night wind of Chicago bit against Margaret Hayes' cheeks as she clutched a cardboard box to her chest, her breath turning to mist in the frigid air. The hallway she had just been forced down still echoed with the sharp scuff of boots, the clipped orders of a building manager, and the heavy thud of movers carrying her life piece by piece. After 43 years of marriage, after 3 years of sleepless nights tending to her husband's illness, after burying him only weeks ago, this was what remained. A box of clothes, a fading wedding photo, and shame. "Ma'am, we need you to clear the entrance," the building manager muttered, his voice flat, professional. Orders came from Hayes Realty. Nothing personal. Hayes Realty. The words were a knife twisting deeper into her chest. That company wasn't just another faceless landlord. It was owned by her son. Daniel Hayes Jr., her only child. "Hey, my beautiful friend. I hope you are doing well today. Drop a comment, and let me know how you are feeling today and where you are watching from. Let me know how you are feeling about this story so far. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because the tension is only just starting to build, and trust me, you are going to want to know how this goes." Margaret's grip trembled around the box as she staggered into the chill of the street. The movers brushed past her, eyes averted, avoiding the unbearable intimacy of her humiliation. They didn't know they were carrying out an eviction signed off by her own blood. They didn't see the cracks in her world splitting wider with each step away from the apartment she had shared with Edward, her late husband. The Riverside penthouse had been their refuge during Edward's treatments at the hospital a few blocks away. Within those walls, she had watched him slip further into frailty, yet still cling to her hand with a strength born of love. And now, because a single will had left the fortune and the business empire to her, not their son, she stood in the cold, an exile in her own family. She lowered the box onto the curb, her knees weak. The photo frame at the top shifted, and Edward's smiling face stared back at her. Her throat burned. "Why, Edward? Why would you do this to me?" She had asked the question 100 times since the will reading, but tonight the words felt like a desperate cry into the void. She could still hear Jonathan Reed's solemn voice echoing from that oak-paneled office. "To my beloved wife, Margaret Hayes, I leave full stewardship of Hayes Enterprises, my estate, and all assets, amounting to $52 million. The words had rung like a sentence. A crown she never wanted. A burden she was certain she could not carry. Across the table, Daniel's jaw had clenched, his eyes narrowing into a hard glint that she had never seen directed at her before. "This is wrong," he had said days later, when grief turned to resentment. "You can't run a business. You never worked a day in it. I did. I built with him. You were just," his voice broke, but the word came out anyway, cruel and final. "Just at home." Margaret had stood frozen then, his accusations slicing through years of sacrifice. Just at home. Just the mother who gave up her career to raise him. Just the wife who carried Edward through sickness and storms. Just. The box dug into her palms now as if pressing that word deeper into her skin. The hum of the mover's van pulling away snapped her from her daze. The street stretched empty around her, the glow of the city distant, indifferent. For the first time in her 66 years, she felt completely severed from the safety of family. Daniel hadn't come to face her. He had signed his name on a piece of paper and vanished into comfort with Sophia, his cunning wife. It was easier to let strangers throw his mother into the night. Margaret wrapped her shawl tighter, though it did nothing against the bitter wind. She thought of Clara Mitchell, her old friend from St. Andrew's Church, who had once told her, "If life ever breaks you, come find me." At the time, Margaret had brushed it off. She never thought her own son would be the one to break her. She lifted the box again, her body aching, and began walking toward the glow of the church's stained glass windows in the distance. Each step was heavier than the last, as if dragging chains of memory and grief. Her husband's last words floated back to her. "You'll be stronger than you think, Maggie." He had whispered it with fevered breath, his hand trembling in hers. She had thought he meant she would endure his passing. Now she realized he had been preparing her for something worse, the betrayal she faced tonight. Her feet slowed as the church loomed closer. Doubt, sharp and merciless, clawed at her mind. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe Edward had been wrong. Could she truly hold on to $52 million, an empire of businesses, and the ruthless world that came with it? Or had Edward left her to carry a weight that would crush her before long? Her son's voice echoed, cruel and relentless. You don't deserve it. Margaret's heart quaked under the weight of the question that lingered in the frozen night. What if he was right? The morning after her eviction, Margaret Hayes awoke on a narrow cot in the small side room of St. Andrew's Church. Sunlight spilled through stained glass windows, scattering red and gold patterns across the worn floorboards. The gentle hum of the city outside was muffled here, replaced by the faint rustle of hymn books and the smell of old wood polished by decades of hands. This wasn't home, but it was safe for now. Clara Mitchell entered quietly, carrying a tray of tea and a warm roll. Clara's soft eyes scanned her friend with the kind of concern only decades of friendship could foster. You didn't eat last night, she said gently, setting the tray on the small table. I thought maybe today would be easier if you start with something warm. Margaret sat up slowly, her body stiff from the cold of the night before. She wrapped the church blanket tighter around her shoulders. I don't know how I got here, Clara, she whispered. I don't even recognize my own son anymore. Clara lowered herself onto the chair beside her, taking Margaret's hand. Grief does strange things to people. And money does worse. Daniel's hurting too, though he hides it. But Margaret, you can't let his bitterness define you. Margaret nodded weakly, but inside her heart throbbed with 1,000 questions. She remembered the way Daniel had looked at her across the lawyer's desk, jaw tight, eyes cold. Her sweet boy, once clinging to her skirts as a child, had become a stranger. A man whose ambitions had hollowed out the tenderness she remembered. Margaret's mind wandered back decades, to the earliest days of her marriage with Edward Hayes. She had been just 23, brimming with laughter and ambition, when she first walked into the bustling streets of Chicago with him. Edward was magnetic, a man with vision burning in his eyes, already dreaming of Hayes Enterprises before it even existed. He had seen the potential of the city's real estate market, the chance to build something lasting, something that would bear his name long after he was gone. For a few short years, Margaret had pursued her own career in teaching, a profession she loved dearly. But when Daniel was born, she had made a choice she never regretted then. She left the classroom behind to raise their son and to support Edward's growing empire from the shadows. She managed the home, the schedules, the long nights when Edward was too busy drafting plans to sleep. She was the unseen foundation. She remembered Daniel's childhood vividly. The way his small hand fit into hers as they strolled through Lincoln Park, the laughter as Edward hoisted him onto his shoulders, promising him one day he would inherit the city. Margaret's world had been small but meaningful, tethered to family and love. That was enough for her. But somewhere along the line, things had shifted. Daniel grew restless, drawn to Edward's business meetings more than his mother's bedtime stories. By college, he was already immersed in Hayes Enterprises, shadowing his father, learning the ropes of real estate deals and property management. Margaret had watched with quiet pride, even when Edward scolded her gently for spoiling him. He needs to know life isn't handed to him, Maggie, Edward would say, frowning as Daniel walked away from yet another cushioned opportunity. Ambition without discipline is dangerous. Margaret, ever the peacemaker, had defended her son. He'll find his way. He just wants to make you proud. But in hindsight, she wondered if she had confused indulgence with love. The sound of footsteps pulled her back into the present. Jonathan Reed, Edward's longtime lawyer, entered the church-side room, his leather briefcase tucked under his arm. His presence was steadying, his salt and pepper hair and calm eyes radiating loyalty. "Margaret," he said softly, inclining his head toward Clara before addressing her directly. "I wish our meeting yesterday had gone differently. Daniel, well, he's made his feelings clear." Margaret's throat tightened. "He hates me, Jonathan. My own son. All because of a decision I don't understand." Jonathan set the briefcase down and leaned forward. "Edward trusted you for a reason. He wasn't a man to make rash choices. He left specific instructions in his will. And I need you to know there may be more he left behind. Something private. But before I share it, you need to decide. Will you stand by his wishes or yield to Daniel's demands?" Margaret's heart pounded. Yield. The word echoed her son's cold ultimatum. "Hand it over, mother. It's what's best for you at your age." Clara squeezed her hand firmly. "You are stronger than you think, Margaret. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Margaret swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. She thought of Edward's tired voice in his final days. "You'll be stronger than you think." But at that moment she felt anything but strong. She felt like a woman cornered, doubting whether she could ever live up to the faith her husband had placed in her. Jonathan studied her quietly, then said, "Edward believed in you. More than anyone. The truth of why will come, Margaret. But only if you're ready to face it." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She wasn't ready, not yet. But somewhere deep inside, a small flame stirred, a question that refused to let her rest. Why had Edward chosen her, and not their son? 10 days before the night in the street, when shame and winter bit her bones, Margaret sat across from Jonathan Reed in his loop office, hands folded in her lap like a student bracing for a lesson she didn't feel ready to learn. The wall of glass behind Jonathan framed Chicago's steel spine, bridges and towers stubborn against gray sky. The city looked unmovable. Margaret did not. To her right sat her son, Daniel, shoulders squared in a navy suit that made him look harder than she remembered. On his left, Sophia leaned back with elegant poise, one leg crossed, a patient smile that never reached her eyes. She slid her fingers along the edge of Daniel's sleeve like a private signal. Jonathan opened a heavy leather folio, the room filling with the soft rasp of paper. "We'll read the final will and instructions as filed," he said. Edward amended these documents 3 months before his passing. Margaret tried to hold her breath steady. The mention of Edward still struck like a bell through her ribs. She traced the line of her wedding band, the gold thin from decades of wear. Jonathan read, "To my beloved wife, Margaret Hayes, I leave stewardship of Hayes Enterprises and all personal and real property, valued at $52 million. The words hung there, irrevocable. I appoint her as sole trustee of the Hayes Family Trust. Distributions to my son, Daniel Hayes, Jr., shall be made at the trustee's discretion upon the resolution of outstanding risks identified prior to my death." Outstanding risks? Daniel snapped, already flushing. What does that even mean? Sophia's voice was smooth. It means vagueness, which we intend to cure. She turned to Jonathan. Surely you advised him against such open-ended language. Jonathan's gaze didn't flicker. Edward was specific. He'll remain so in a separate memorandum for the trustee. He placed a sealed document envelope on the table, but did not slide it across. This memorandum is to be read by Margaret alone when, and only when, she chooses to accept her role fully. Daniel's hands curled into fists. This is a power grab, Mother. He set you up to control everything while the person who actually knows the business, has to wait on your approval. Margaret found her voice, fragile but present. Your father trusted me to protect the legacy. He said so. From who? Daniel's smile was humorless. From me? Sophia cut in, tone velvet over steel. We all want what's best for the company and for Margaret's peace. But let's be honest. The day-to-day, the board, the lenders, they look to Daniel. There's a straightforward solution. She pulled a crisp packet from her bag and set it between them. A voluntary transfer of control. Sign this, Margaret, and the board will seat Daniel as managing trustee. You'll retain a stipend and ceremonial title. You'll be cared for. It's what any reasonable mother would want. Jonathan didn't touch the packet. Margaret isn't required to sign anything today. Daniel leaned forward. But she could if she cared about avoiding damage. The markets react badly to instability, Mother. Tenants get spooked. Banks call notes. People lose jobs. He glanced at Sophia, who gave the faintest nod. Let's not put the company through that. Sign. Something small hardened in Margaret's chest. She folded her hands tighter. You think I would harm the company? I think you don't know what you're doing, Daniel said. Father never meant for you to be out of your depth like this. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. Jonathan's jaw set. Edward was lucid and methodical. He took counsel. He made choices. Sophia smiled again, unbothered. Or he was sentimental. Either way, sentiment is a poor strategy. She slid the packet closer until it touched Margaret's fingertips. One signature, and we all go home. Margaret could hear Edward's last words like a thread pulling through cloth. You'll be stronger than you think, Maggie. The room seemed to tilt. The city beyond the glass held steady. She didn't reach for the pen. Tell me about these risks, Jonathan, she said quietly. If my husband named them, I need to know. Jonathan tapped the sealed envelope. His explanation is here. He wanted you to open it when you were ready to carry the burden with your own conviction, not to relieve pressure today. Daniel laughed once, short and bitter. A scavenger hunt? For my inheritance. Margaret turned to him, searching his face for the boy who once fell asleep on her shoulder at Wrigley, the boy who cried when the Cubs lost. She found only a man with a jawline like a locked door. You have always been provided for, she said softly. Your father said it himself. And that's the problem, Sophia murmured. You think provision buys submission. Jonathan closed the folio with a careful press. Margaret, you don't need to answer today. But know this, if you sign away stewardship now, you cannot undo it. If you hold your ground, there will be pressure. The company can weather it. So can you with counsel. Silence settled like dust. Daniel stood, chair scraping the floor. We'll give you 48 hours, he said. After that, I move to freeze all non-essential operating funds and audit the penthouse lease. He straightened his cuffs. For the good of the company. Margaret's stomach dropped. You wouldn't. I would, he said, not looking at her as Sophia gathered her bag. Tell the church woman you're staying with that it won't take long. Sophia paused at the door and lowered her voice near Margaret's ear. You've had a beautiful life of being adored, she whispered with a pleasant smile. Don't ruin it by pretending you're a queen. The door closed with a whisper. The city hummed. Margaret stared at the envelope, its flap sealed in Edward's hand. Ready when you are, it seemed to say. She reached but stopped. She was not yet the woman who could open it and bear what was inside. Not yet. Jonathan, she whispered, what if I can't do this? He stood and came around the desk, not as counsel but as a friend. Then we will learn together, he said. And if you fall, we will get back up. She exhaled, slow and trembling. Then my answer is no. I won't sign. Jonathan nodded once, as if a domino had tipped exactly the way Edward had planned. He slid the envelope toward her at last. Keep it with you, he said. When you're ready, the truth will explain why he chose you. Margaret slipped it into her bag, the weight of it like a hidden heartbeat. 2 days later, as promised, the first blow landed. My dear friends, if this story has you feeling the weight of Margaret's choice, tap subscribe, drop a comment about the moment that shocked you most, and share this with someone who needs courage today. Your support helps us keep telling stories where truth and love fight back. 2 days after Margaret refused to sign away her stewardship, the first blow struck exactly as Daniel had promised. She returned to the Riverside penthouse one afternoon with Clara at her side, only to find the lobby guards blocking her path. Their faces carried practiced neutrality, but their words cut deep. Mrs. Hayes, we've been instructed to inform you that your lease has been suspended pending an audit. Until further notice, access is restricted. Margaret blinked, heart pounding. This is my home. I lived here with my husband while he was in treatment. I'm sorry, ma'am, the guard said, almost whispering. The order came directly from Hayes Realty. Clara put an arm around her as Margaret's legs weakened. Behind her, tenants entered and exited freely, watching curiously as the widow of the late Edward Hayes was turned away from her own building. A murmur spread through the lobby. By the time Margaret staggered back into the street, shame had already begun its cruel parade. At St. Andrews, Margaret tried to compose herself over tea. He's shutting me out, Clara. Piece by piece. First the home, then the funds. What comes next? Clara's eyes darkened. He wants you to cave. He knows if he breaks your spirit, you'll sign everything over. But you can't. Margaret shook her head, tears burning. I can't fight him. He knows the language of business, the law, the people on the board. All I know is cooking dinners, soothing nightmares, keeping Edward alive with prayer and soup and song when he was too weak to lift his head. What use is that now? Clara squeezed her hand. More use than you think. The next morning, Jonathan arrived with a file. Daniel petitioned the board to freeze discretionary spending, he explained. Payroll will continue, but discretionary accounts are under review. He's moving quickly. Margaret buried her face in her hands. He wants to starve me into surrender. Yes, Jonathan admitted. But we have recourse. The trust documents give you final authority. He's betting you'll panic and hand over control. If you hold, he'll lose momentum. Margaret looked up, her voice trembling. And if I fail? Jonathan studied her carefully. Then Edward's fears will be realized. She thought of the sealed envelope in her bag, heavy as stone. She hadn't yet opened it. Fear whispered, what if it contained truths she couldn't bear? What if Edward had seen something in Daniel, something dark, and she would have to face it without turning away? Meanwhile, Daniel and Sophia wove their narrative with ruthless precision. At Hayes Enterprises, Daniel stood in the boardroom before executives and middle managers, his tone calm but heavy with concern. My mother is grieving, he told them, hands clasped as though in prayer. She was thrust into this role unprepared. Out of respect for my father, I'm allowing her time. But the truth is, she can't manage the complexity of our operations. It isn't safe. Sophia added, we love her dearly. But the stability of Hayes Enterprises, and all your jobs, depends on someone capable. Daniel has been here since college. You've seen his work. You know who can keep us strong. A few heads nodded. Doubt was a contagion. Within days, whispers spread. Tenants worried about leases, investors called nervously, and Margaret's name appeared in headlines laced with skepticism. Widow thrust into control. Can she save Hayes Enterprises or sink it? Margaret read the articles alone in the church side room, her hands trembling so hard she could barely hold the paper. Her face, captured in photographs leaving the lawyer's office, looked lost and small. To the world, she was already failing. That night, Clara found her staring into the darkness. You can't let them write your story for you, Margaret. Margaret's voice cracked. But what if they're right? What if Edward's trust in me was misplaced? She heard again Daniel's bitter laugh across Jonathan's desk. A scavenger hunt for my inheritance? And Sophia's whisper near her ear. Don't ruin it by pretending you're a queen. Every word chipped away at her. Every whisper told her she was unworthy. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she remembered Edward's hand squeezing hers in the hospital bed, the faint spark in his eyes as he whispered, You'll be stronger than you think. Margaret lay awake until dawn, the sealed envelope still untouched in her bag. She couldn't bring herself to open it yet, but she knew she would have to soon. Because Daniel was not finished. And if she didn't fight back, she would lose not only the company, but the last fragments of her husband's legacy. The city outside stirred awake. Inside the quiet church, Margaret made a fragile vow to herself. She would not give in, not yet. Morning poured through the stained glass of St. Andrew's like melted honey, and Margaret finally surrendered to the weight in her handbag. She set the sealed envelope on the small wooden table, its ivory flap still creased where Jonathan had pressed it closed. Clara stood by the doorway with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, saying nothing. She knew when silence was the only kindness. Margaret traced Edward's handwriting on the front, steady, deliberate, unmistakable, and slit the envelope with a butter knife from the church kitchenette. Inside lay 3 items: a letter on thick stationery, a slim red key card labeled RF, and a small USB drive no bigger than her thumbnail. She unfolded the letter. Edward's voice, measured and affectionate, seemed to rise from the page. My Maggie, if you are reading this, it means I've asked more of you than any husband has the right to ask. I am sorry for the burden, but I am not sorry for my trust. Your stewardship is not a slight to our son. It is a shield for him. There are risks I could not resolve before my time ran out. I will list them plainly. 1. Unsecured commitments. Daniel has personally guaranteed short-term bridge loans arranged by outside partners he believes are harmless. They are not. The paper trails point to aggressive property flips designed to extract cash, not build value. If they collapse, creditors will come for him first. 2. Northlake Partners LLC. A shell that appears independent but is controlled by parties with ties to Sophia's inner circle. Money moves through it in consulting fees that never produce work. If Hayes Enterprises continues to fund these invoices, the enterprise will bleed out quietly. 3. Domestic risk. I have reason to believe Sophia has made contingency plans in the event of my death. Plans that would separate Daniel from his wealth at a vulnerable moment. A friend in the legal community found her exploring divorce counsel and asset strategies months ago. He told me this privately, and I confirmed communications I wish I had never read. I do not know if our son understands any of this. I pray he does not. Pride and love make people blind. You will not be blind, Maggie. That is why I chose you. Work with Jonathan. The red key card opens a safe drawer at his office. Inside is a folder marked Northlake. On the USB are ledgers and emails collected lawfully from company servers. Do not share either until you are ready. If the board moves against you, give Jonathan the standing letter to the directors. He knows which one. You have always been the spine of this family. Do not mistake quiet for weakness. Quiet is where steel is forged. Forgive me for leaving you this task. Protect our boy, even if he hates you for it. Edward. The letter trembled in Margaret's hands. For a long breath, she could only listen to her own pulse and the distant rattle of a bus outside. Sophia's name on the page, the blunt mention of divorce counsel, the shell company. Each line rearranged the furniture of her mind. It was not sentiment that had placed the crown on her head. It was strategy. It was love with its sleeves rolled up. Clara set the mug down and took the edge of the letter carefully, reading without speaking. When she finished, she lifted her gaze. He didn't choose you to punish Daniel, she said softly. He chose you to save him. Tears cut warm paths down Margaret's face, but there was a different heat in her chest now. Cleaner, more focused. Jonathan said there would be truth, she whispered. I thought he meant comfort. This is not comfort. It's a map, Clara said. Margaret slipped the red key card and USB back into the envelope and tucked it into her handbag. Her fingers no longer shook. I need to go to Jonathan's office. Clara nodded. I'll call a car. Before they could move, Margaret's phone buzzed. A message from Daniel lit the screen. Board convening emergency session 8 a.m. tomorrow to appoint interim managing trustee. You're invited, but this is happening. Her jaw tightened. He's accelerating. Then we are too, Clara said, already reaching for her coat. Jonathan cleared his schedule the moment Margaret called. In his office, he slid a small drawer open and pressed the red key card to a scanner. A hidden compartment clicked, releasing a thick folder stamped Northlake in bold black letters. He set it on the desk between them as if placing a patient on an operating table. What you're about to see isn't a smoking gun, he said. It's a chain. We'll follow each link. Inside, Margaret found invoices from Northlake Partners LLC for strategic consulting, each paid within 72 hours by Hayes Enterprises. She found no deliverables attached. The amounts were neat and rounded. A second subfolder contained bank records showing transfers from Northlake to a separate account, Sable Row Advisors, and then further to a private account with initials that were not Daniel's. Whose? She asked. Jonathan's face was sober. We can't prove ownership yet. But Sable Row is managed by a boutique firm where Sophia's friend, Elise Hart, is a junior partner. Margaret closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she opened them, Jonathan slid a printout across the desk, an email chain recovered from the company server. Daniel to Sophia, then Sophia to a G. Ward, subject line bridge loan terms. The body was short, almost innocent, questions about timing, a note about pushing signatures through while EH is in hospice. G. Ward? Margaret asked, her voice thin. A fund intermediary, Jonathan said. We're still mapping it. Margaret placed Edward's letter beside the documents. The ink looked steadier than her breathing. He knew, she whispered. He saw the edges of it and couldn't finish. There's more, Jonathan said, gesturing to the USB. He connected it to a secure laptop. Spreadsheet files opened like tiled windows, payment logs, calendar entries, and a folder of screenshots. Margaret leaned closer. In one, a message thread. Elise, once probate clears, timing is clean. Sophia, understood. He won't sign a postnup. We'll proceed. Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth. The room seemed to recede, the city beyond glass a distant photograph. Not just money. A plan. A clock counting down. Jonathan's voice reached her gently. This is why Edward structured the trust. If you cave now, these hands will close around the company, and around Daniel. Margaret straightened. The trembling had vanished. Then we don't cave. She tapped the letter. We follow the map. Jonathan nodded. I'll retain a forensic accountant, Asha Patel. She's quiet, relentless. We keep this contained, move surgically. You will need to face the board tomorrow with enough to hold the seat without revealing our hand. Margaret folded Edward's letter carefully, as if tucking him back into the space beside her heart. What do I say? The truth you can afford today, Jonathan said. That you're honoring Edward's structure, that discretionary freezes will harm operations, and that you will review all third-party contracts before renewal. Ask for 30 days. Then we tighten the chain. Margaret stood, steadied by purpose. When she reached the door, her phone buzzed again. An email from Hayes Enterprises Board Admin. Agenda. Motion to suspend trustee powers pending competency review. She stared at the words until they stopped blurring. Then she exhaled and turned back to Jonathan. Prepare me, she said. If they want a queen, I'll bring a crown of paper and proof. He allowed himself the smallest smile. Quiet steel, he said. Just like he wrote. The boardroom on the 32nd floor of Hayes Enterprises gleamed with glass and chrome, but to Margaret Hayes it felt like a courtroom where she stood accused. Chicago's skyline stretched behind her in wide panes, but she barely registered the lake's silver shimmer. All she could feel were the stares, half sympathetic, half skeptical, as Daniel and Sophia arranged themselves at the far end of the long table. Jonathan Reed sat beside her, his quiet presence the only anchor in the storm. He had warned her of the agenda, motion to suspend trustee powers pending competency review. Still, seeing the words projected on the digital display tightened her throat until she could scarcely breathe. Daniel's voice carried easily through the room. This isn't about family drama. This is about fiduciary responsibility. The company has obligations, shareholders, tenants, employees. My mother is grieving, and she deserves rest, not responsibility. Forcing her into this role puts everyone at risk. Sophia folded her hands gracefully, a sympathetic tilt to her head. No one here doubts Margaret's devotion to Edward or to this family. But devotion doesn't balance budgets. Love doesn't negotiate with banks. Daniel has been handling operations for years. This transfer is overdue. Murmurs threaded through the directors. Margaret rose slowly, the tremor in her legs betraying the steel she tried to summon. Edward trusted me, she said, her voice softer than she intended. He wrote that I was to steward this company until certain risks were resolved. He believed that handing control to Daniel immediately would expose us all. Do you have evidence of these so-called risks? A director asked sharply. Or is this just a grieving widow's impression? Heat flushed Margaret's cheeks. The envelope, the USB, Edward's warnings, they burned in her handbag, but she couldn't reveal them yet. Jonathan had been clear. Too soon, and Daniel and Sophia would bury everything under legal maneuvers before she had proof stitched together. All she had now was her husband's word. And in this room, that wasn't enough. Daniel's smile was faint, almost pitying. Mother, you don't need to do this. Step aside with dignity. Let me carry the burden. Her chest ached. For a flicker of a second, she wanted to collapse into the chair. Let him take it. Let the noise and the eyes disappear. She was tired, so tired. The effort of standing here while her own son dismantled her piece by piece felt unbearable. Jonathan's voice nudged her forward. Request 30 days, Margaret. That's all. She gripped the edge of the table. I am asking for 30 days, she said, forcing her voice steady. 30 days to review operations and contracts. Edward's trust gave me that right. I will not yield it without cause. Silence fell. Then a vote was called. Hands lifted 6-4 for against 2 abstentions. The motion carried. Margaret's powers were suspended pending a competency review. That night, she returned to St. Andrews with Clara and sank onto the cot like a marionette with cut strings. It's over, she whispered. They stripped me of everything. My son won. Clara crouched beside her. He hasn't won. They've delayed you. Margaret shook her head, covering her face. You didn't see them. The way they looked at me, like a confused old woman clutching at power she doesn't understand. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am just that. Her sobs came then, ragged and unrestrained. Clara held her, rocking her as though she were the child this time. You are not what they say, Clara murmured. You are what Edward saw, but you have to choose to believe it. Margaret pressed her palms against her eyes. I can't. Every step I take feels like sand collapsing under my feet. He trusted me to save Daniel, and I can't even save myself. Jonathan visited the next morning, bringing fresh documents and news of a forensic accountant willing to assist quietly. Margaret barely lifted her head. What's the point, Jonathan? They've taken the crown. I'm humiliated in the press. Even the board thinks I'm incompetent. Jonathan lowered himself into the chair across from her. They've bought time. That's all. Time for us to build a case, to trace the money. You can't quit now. Margaret stared at him, hollow. Do you know what it feels like to be betrayed by your only child? To have the baby you carried, the boy you raised, look at you like you're a fool in his way. Jonathan's silence was answer enough. She shook her head. No case will fix that. When he left, Margaret lay back down, curling into herself. The city hummed beyond the stained glass, but inside the church she felt entombed. For the first time since Edward's death, she wondered if she should surrender. Sign whatever Sophia put in front of her, let Daniel have everything, and retreat into obscurity where no headlines or boardrooms could reach her. She would still have Clara. She would still have her memories of Edward. Perhaps that was enough. But as she drifted into restless sleep, Edward's words chased her again. Quiet is where steel is forged. And in the hollow of her despair, a fragile ember still glowed, waiting. My dear friends, if Margaret's struggle speaks to you, if you've ever felt beaten down when you knew you had more to give, leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss how this journey unfolds. For 2 days, Margaret drifted through the routines of St. Andrew's in silence. She attended morning prayers, washed dishes in the church kitchen, and folded bulletins with Clara, but her spirit hung low. Every glance in the mirror showed her what the board had seen. A weary widow, hair pulled back in defeat, shoulders stooped by weight she could not bear. On the 3rd morning, Clara placed a newspaper in front of her during breakfast. The headline read, Hayes heir apparent. Daniel Hayes poised to lead enterprise through transition. Beneath it, a photo of Daniel and Sophia stepping from a black sedan, Sophia's hand resting lightly on her husband's arm as though guiding him forward. Margaret traced Sophia's smile in the photograph, composed, triumphant. Then her eyes caught the subheadline, Competency Review Scheduled for Widow Trustee. Something inside her snapped. The humiliation burned away into something sharper. I won't be their shadow, she whispered. Clara's eyes lit. That's the Margaret I know. What will you do? Margaret pushed the paper aside. I'll open every door Edward left for me. That afternoon, she met Jonathan Reed at his office, bringing Clara for support. Jonathan introduced them to Asha Patel, a young forensic accountant with keen eyes and a quiet intensity. Asha spread files across the conference table, her fingers moving swiftly as she highlighted chains of numbers. Northlake Partners isn't just bleeding money, Asha explained. It's siphoning funds into accounts linked to Sable Row Advisors. And here, she tapped a spreadsheet, payments coincide with lease renegotiations Daniel approved without board review. The trail points to insider siphoning, but the paperwork masks it as consulting. Margaret leaned closer, heart thumping. If I show this to the board, will they believe me? Not yet, Asha said. They'll dismiss it as incomplete. But if we pair it with Edward's memo and board letter, then tie Sophia's contacts to Sable Row, it becomes undeniable. Jonathan nodded. We build piece by piece. By the time of the competency review, we'll present enough that even Daniel can't wriggle free. Margaret inhaled, her spine straightening. For the first time in weeks, she felt like more than a victim. She was part of the fight. That night, she sat with Clara in the church nave, candles flickering against marble saints. I was ready to give up, Margaret admitted. But Edward saw something I couldn't. He knew I'd break, but he also knew I'd rise. Clara smiled gently. Quiet steel. Margaret nodded, letting the words settle into her bones. Yes, quiet steel. The next morning, Daniel called unexpectedly. His voice was calm, almost tender. Mother, I don't want us to fight anymore. Sophia thinks we can resolve this quietly. Step down now, and I'll ensure you're cared for. A private allowance, a house in Oak Park, staff if you want them. No more meetings. No more headlines. Just peace. Margaret's hand tightened on the phone. For a heartbeat, the offer tempted her, the chance to retreat, to rest. But she remembered Edward's words, Asha's evidence, Sophia's name on divorce petition papers. She remembered the photo of them stepping from the sedan, smiling while she was painted as incompetent. No, Daniel, she said quietly. Not this time. There was a pause. Then his voice hardened. You'll regret this. When the line went dead, Margaret sat in the silence, her pulse steady. Clara placed a hand on her shoulder. That sounded like a woman who finally remembers her worth. Over the next week, Margaret worked with Jonathan and Asha daily. They pieced together timelines, traced transfers, and prepared presentations. Margaret forced herself to learn the language of ledgers and audits, asking questions until the fog lifted. For the first time, she began to understand the mechanics of Edward's world and her place in it. On the 8th night, Jonathan pushed a file across the table. "Tomorrow, you address the board again. This time, we bring them something they can't ignore." Margaret opened the file. Inside were copies of contracts showing Northlake invoices signed by Daniel, alongside emails referencing Sophia's contacts. Not proof of fraud yet, but the shape of it. She exhaled, fear and courage mingling. "What if they laugh me out again?" "Then you stand anyway," Jonathan said. "Because the moment you yield is the moment Edward's fears come true. This is no longer about you. It's about Daniel's future and the truth." Margaret closed the folder, her hands firm. For the first time, she felt the ember in her chest blaze into flame. She was no longer drifting. She was moving toward the fight. The boardroom felt different the second time Margaret entered it. The same expanse of glass framed Chicago's skyline. The same cold chrome gleamed beneath fluorescent lights. But she walked taller now. Jonathan and Asha flanked her, carrying neatly bound folders. Clara waited outside in the lobby, whispering a prayer with her rosary. Daniel was already there, standing at the head of the table with Sophia beside him. His smile was cordial but tight, as though carved from stone. "Mother," he said smoothly, "I trust you've reconsidered." Margaret met his eyes without flinching. "I've prepared a statement." The directors shifted as she placed her folder before them. Her hands no longer trembled. "Edward Hayes trusted me to serve as trustee until certain risks were resolved. I believe those risks are real, and I have begun to investigate them. I ask only that this board allow me 30 days to continue. Attached you will find records of questionable contracts with Northlake Partners LLC, approved under Daniel's authority, with no evidence of deliverables." Murmurs rippled. One director flipped through the pages quickly, frowning. Another adjusted her glasses, reading more slowly. Daniel laughed lightly. "Consulting work is often intangible. My mother is not trained in corporate finance. She misunderstands what she's reading." Asha leaned forward. "With respect, the ledgers show payments to Northlake followed by identical amounts transferring to Sable Row Advisors. That is not standard consulting practice. It's siphoning. Speculation," Sophia interjected smoothly, "and dangerous to imply without proof. This board knows Daniel has navigated complex deals for years. Margaret's efforts are heartfelt but misplaced." Margaret felt the old doubt creep in, but she forced it down. "Misplaced or not, I am trustee until proven unfit. Edward chose me because he saw dangers coming. I am not here to win a contest with my son. I am here to protect what Edward built, and to protect Daniel from walking blind into ruin." The room quieted. For a moment, the words hung like a fragile bridge over open air. A director cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes, your 30-day request is modest. I see no harm in granting it." But another countered. "If the company is at risk, we can't afford hesitation. A competency review is already scheduled." Sophia rose, voice honeyed with urgency. "Margaret is a grieving widow, thrust into this role by sentiment. Daniel is ready now. Why prolong the instability?" Jonathan spoke firmly. "Instability does not come from Margaret. It comes from secrecy. Allow her 30 days, and you'll have clarity. Deny her, and you invite headlines questioning why Hayes Enterprises silenced its own trustee without review of the facts." The directors exchanged uneasy glances. Reputation weighed heavily in this city. Finally, the chairwoman spoke. "Very well. 30 days. But understand, Mrs. Hayes, this is not carte blanche. Deliver evidence or step down." Margaret inclined her head. "That is all I ask." When the meeting adjourned, Daniel caught her arm just outside the boardroom. His grip was firm, his voice low. "What are you doing? You don't know the people you're crossing. These aren't Sunday school disagreements. They will chew you up." Margaret pulled free. "If that's true, then you're already in too deep. And I won't let you drown." His eyes narrowed. "You think you're saving me? You're destroying me." Sophia stepped between them, her perfume sharp, her smile sharper. "Daniel, let's not waste breath. She won't last 30 days. Then to Margaret, we'll be generous. When this collapses, You'll still have a place with us. Maybe a guest room in Oak Park. You can tell yourself you tried. Margaret met her gaze, steel in her eyes. You mistake me, Sophia. I don't try. I endure. Sophia's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. Then she turned, guiding Daniel away. That evening, Margaret, Jonathan, and Asha gathered at the church office to strategize. The folder of documents lay open between them, but Margaret barely glanced at it. Her focus was inward, on Edward's letter tucked safely in her bag. They gave us 30 days, Jonathan said. We use every one of them. Asha, keep tracing the transfers. Margaret, your role is to hold steady. Appearances matter, confidence in public, resolve in private. Margaret nodded. For 30 days, I will be the trustee Edward believed in. Clara entered quietly with coffee for them all. She set the mugs down and whispered to Margaret, You looked like Edward today. Calm. Certain. Like a man who knew the city bent to his will. Margaret smiled faintly. I don't want the city to bend. I just want the truth to stand. But as she lay in the church cot later that night, sleep evading her, she could still feel Daniel's hand gripping her arm, his voice laced with fear. You don't know the people you're crossing. She wondered, with a shiver, if he was right, and if the next 30 days would test not only her courage, but her very survival. The 30 days the board had granted did not unfold like a reprieve. They cracked open like a vault. Every dawn brought a new chain in the ledger, a new whisper from the past, a new tremor under the polished floor of Hayes Enterprises. Asha Patel worked in near silence at Jonathan's office, headphones around her neck, fingers flying across spreadsheets like a pianist's. Margaret learned to read the language of transactions, the way dates chorus with amounts, how transfers travel in shadows. She slept little and prayed more. Clara kept a thermos of soup in the kitchenette and a candle lit on Jonathan's windowsill, a small flame over a sea of paper. On the 7th day, Asha looked up sharply. There, she said, tapping a line item. Northlake invoice number 3119, posted as milestone 3. It routes to Sable Row, and then to an account ending in -0427. The account owner of record is masked by a trust, Hart Willow Holdings. Hart, Jonathan repeated. Elise. He rubbed his jaw. We suspected the conduit. This places her firm in the flow. What about Sophia? Margaret asked. Asha spun her laptop, opening a metadata view. Invoice number 3119 was authored by a user with the handle e.hart from an IP block associated with Sable Row's office. Attached to it is a calendar invite forwarding chain, Elise to S.Hayes. Confirm payment before Friday. DC trip moved, Ward ready. Margaret stared at the screen. Ward ready. The name from Edward's letter. What does Ward mean to them? A bridge lender with a taste for leverage, Jonathan said. Short-term capital at sharp terms. If Daniel guaranteed those loans personally, default puts the guillotine over his assets. They were building a map that looked terribly like the one Edward had sketched in his letter. Only now it had coordinates. Sophia, for her part, read the calendar differently. 30 days to salt the earth. A profile ran in a business weekly with glossy photos and glossier insinuations. Can a mourning widow lead a modern portfolio? Sources express concern. There were no sources named. The photos showed Margaret stepping into St. Andrews in the same coat she had worn since the winter began. Commentators filled daytime shows with concerned tones about aging leadership and the burden of grief. The word competency floated like a diagnosis in every segment. Clara tried to hide the magazines, but Margaret insisted on reading them. Let them have their noise, she said. We have paper. Paper wasn't the only ally. On the 13th day, a maintenance supervisor from Hayes Realty called Jonathan's private line. He spoke in a hushed voice, preferring to meet in person. In the back pews of St. Andrews at dusk, he told them what he had seen. A few months before Mr. Hayes passed, he said, twisting his cap in his hands, Mrs. Sophia came to the Riverside garage at night with a woman I've since seen in magazines, that Hart lady. They met a man by the elevators, tall, salt and pepper hair. They talked about timing, and paper cleared, and no post-nup. I only remember because I was fixing a light panel, and they didn't see me. The man handed over a folder. I didn't think much at the time. Now, I thought you should know. Can you describe the man? Jonathan asked. The supervisor nodded. Slim, expensive coat. He drove off in a black car with a plate starting with GW. G. Ward, Asha murmured. The supervisor swallowed. If I talk to anyone else, I'm out of a job. You won't, Margaret promised. You trusted us, we'll protect you. 2 days later, as if sensing the ground shift, Sophia struck harder. An anonymous packet arrived at the board chair's house. A thick dossier alleging that Margaret had cognitive lapses and paranoid tendencies, complete with a forged note on a clinic letterhead. By noon, a gossip site published a headline, Leaked Medical Claims. Inside the competency questions at Hayes. Margaret read the article in Jonathan's office, hands steady. They'll paint over us until the truth dries. Jonathan's eyes were tired but intent. Then we paint faster. Asha slid a new document across the table. We have bank camera stills from a cooperating teller, she said quietly. Elise and Sophia depositing a cashier's check matching the Sable Row transfer. Same day as invoice number 3119. And here, she added, text logs from a secondary device Daniel used, recovered from a backup. He messages Sophia. I signed the personal guarantee. Ward says it's a bridge. Father would understand. Sophia replies, he would understand growth. He wouldn't understand you trapped under your mother's thumb. Margaret pressed her lips together, pain and fury braided tight. He thinks he's building something. She's building an exit. Jonathan nodded. We can't accuse motive. We can show money. He closed the folder, then opened a fresh one. We assemble an exhibit book, contracts, flows, camera stills, calendar links, texts. We include Edward's memorandum under privilege for the judge, not for public circulation. We request that the competency review be combined with a preliminary injunction hearing on the Northlake payments. Margaret exhaled. Make them answer to the truth in one room. Exactly, Jonathan said. It's time to stop playing defense. At dusk, Margaret walked alone along the river, the March wind combing the water into silver ripples. Couples passed, huddled in coats. A saxophonist played something mournful under a bridge. She paused at the railing and thought of Daniel at 10, cheeks windburned, laughing when Edward taught him to skip stones. She remembered Sophia the first time, bright and warm, a guest who brought sunflowers and offered to wash dishes. Where did we go wrong? She asked the river. The river said nothing but moved steadily forward. Her phone vibrated with a court notification. Jonathan had filed the combined motion. The hearing was set, Monday, 9 a.m. The subject line glowed on her screen. Hayes Enterprises. Trustee competency and preliminary injunction. Margaret tucked the phone away and stood straighter. Monday had shape now. So did her fear. She walked back toward the church with her head high, the city's cold breath at her back like a hand urging her on. Inside St. Andrews, Clara met her at the door. Well, Monday, Margaret said. Clara squeezed her hands. Then Sunday we pray. And Monday we fight. Margaret smiled, thin but true. Quiet steel, she said. The courthouse at 9 a.m. on Monday buzzed with voices, heels clicking across marble, and the faint smell of coffee carried in from the street. Margaret Hayes stood just inside the double doors, hands wrapped tightly around her handbag. Inside were the files Jonathan and Asha had prepared. The contracts, the ledgers, the screenshots, Edward's memorandum sealed under privilege. She carried Edward with her, his handwriting, his trust, pressed close to her ribs like armor. Breathe, Jonathan whispered as they approached the courtroom. This isn't just about defense anymore. We're here to reveal. Asha adjusted her blazer, calm but electric. Clara sat in the gallery already, rosary beads threaded between her fingers, lips moving in prayer. At the other table, Daniel and Sophia entered with a small entourage of attorneys in dark suits. Daniel avoided Margaret's gaze, jaw tight. Sophia, radiant in a cream coat, caught Margaret's eye and offered the faintest smile, more a warning than a greeting. The judge entered, and the room hushed. We are here for two related matters: the competency review of Trustee Margaret Hayes and the preliminary injunction request concerning Hayes Enterprises' third-party contracts. Jonathan rose first. Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes has faced public aspersions on her capacity to serve, but we contend those claims are manufactured to conceal ongoing financial irregularities. Today, we present evidence that Hayes Enterprises funds were siphoned through Northlake Partners into shell accounts connected to associates of Sophia Hayes. He gestured toward Asha, who began distributing binders to the judge and board representatives seated behind counsel. Screens lit with spreadsheets, payment flows, and side-by-side bank stills. Daniel's attorney rose. Your Honor, this is sensationalism. Margaret Hayes has no background in finance. These supposed irregularities are routine consulting arrangements. To smear family members with vague insinuations is beneath the dignity of this proceeding. Routine consulting does not explain mirrored transfers within 72 hours, Asha said firmly. Nor does it explain bank stills showing Sophia Hayes and Elise Hart depositing checks tied to those invoices. This is not innuendo, it is arithmetic. Sophia leaned to whisper in her counsel's ear, but Margaret caught the tightness in her smile, the twitch in her hand as she smoothed her skirt. Cracks in porcelain. Margaret rose slowly when Jonathan signaled. The courtroom seemed to shrink around her as she gripped the witness rail. I am not an accountant, she began. I am a wife who buried her husband and a mother who raised a son. Edward Hayes trusted me because he saw dangers he could not untangle in time. He asked me to protect Daniel, even if Daniel despised me for it. I am not here to disgrace my son. I am here to keep him from ruin. She lifted a page Jonathan had prepared, a printout of the text recovered from Daniel's backup. This is my son writing. I signed the personal guarantee. Ward says it's a bridge. Father would understand. My husband did not understand. He knew it was a noose. That is why he asked me to stand here today. The judge studied the page, expression unreadable. Murmurs swept the gallery. Daniel shot to his feet. Mother, stop this. Sit down, his attorney hissed, tugging his sleeve. But the outburst had already echoed through the chamber. Margaret lowered the page. If you wish to test my competency, then test it. But know this. Incompetence is not refusing to sign away authority. Incompetence is ignoring where the money bleeds and calling it growth. Sophia's attorney rose swiftly, voice sharp. We object to the introduction of partial text records without full context. We object to insinuations regarding Mrs. Hayes' personal life. This is a widow clinging to power she does not comprehend. Jonathan was ready. He lifted a sealed letter. Your Honor, under privilege, we offer Edward Hayes' memorandum. It will not be released to the public record, but it details the exact risks we have now corroborated, bridge loans, Northlake, and the involvement of parties close to Sophia Hayes. This is not sentiment. This is foresight. The judge accepted the envelope, skimming quickly before setting it aside. I will review in chambers. Continue. The hours stretched as experts walked through spreadsheets, photographs, and affidavits. Asha's clear voice guided the court through chains of payments, her confidence disarming attempts to dismiss her as just a consultant. Jonathan kept the rhythm steady, careful to let Margaret's presence anchor the narrative. By mid-afternoon, the judge called a recess. Margaret stepped into the corridor, her legs trembling now that the adrenaline thinned. Clara rushed to her side. You were magnificent, she whispered. Edward would be proud. Margaret shook her head, pressing back tears. I only spoke what he left for me. The rest is in God's hands. Down the hall, Daniel argued in hushed tones with Sophia, his face red, his gestures sharp. Sophia's calm veneer cracked as she snapped something low, turning away from him. For the first time, Margaret saw fear in their posture. Not fear of her, but fear of what the truth might cost them. When court reconvened, the judge's voice carried firm across the room. These proceedings are not complete. However, the evidence provided warrants serious consideration. The competency review is suspended pending full financial inquiry. Mrs. Hayes remains trustee. A sharp gasp cut through the gallery. Daniel's fists clenched. Sophia's lips parted, but no words came. Margaret closed her eyes, relief flooding her chest. One battle was won, but she knew the war was not finished. The inquiry would cut deeper, and Daniel and Sophia would not retreat quietly. The judge continued. Preliminary injunction is granted. All third-party payments to Northlake Partners and affiliates are frozen effective immediately. The gavel struck. The sound was both thunder and deliverance. The corridors of the courthouse hummed with voices after the gavel fell, but Margaret heard only the steady thrum of her own heartbeat. She had remained trustee. Northlake's siphoning had been halted. For the first time in weeks, she had not been stripped or silenced. She had spoken, and the law had listened. But the victory felt fragile. Daniel stormed past her without a glance, his jaw tight, his attorney hurrying to keep up. Sophia lingered long enough to offer a brittle smile. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she whispered. "Paper freezes can thaw." Then she swept away, cream coat swishing behind her. Jonathan exhaled beside Margaret. That was a crack in their armor. Now we widen it. In the days that followed, headlines shifted. Widow trustee holds seat amid court battle. Judge freezes Northlake payments. Business journals no longer cast her as merely grieving. They called her resolute, quiet but firm. Investors still fretted, but doubt no longer flowed in just one direction. Meanwhile, Asha's investigation pressed deeper. One evening in Jonathan's office, she set down a new file. "We have confirmation. Sable Row advisors funneled over $1.2 million into Hart Willow Holdings, and from there into a personal account in Sophia Hayes' maiden name." Margaret's breath caught. "So Daniel doesn't know," Jonathan finished. "She's keeping him close as cover, but the siphoning leads to her. If we show him this, it could break him." Clara frowned. "Break him, or make him strike harder?" Margaret stared at the file. The ache in her chest was not just fury but grief. Her son was complicit in arrogance, but perhaps not in theft. She whispered, "Edward warned me, protect him even if he hates me." Maybe this is what he meant. The competency review hearing reconvened a week later, this time less tense. The judge requested updates, and Jonathan presented the growing ledger of evidence. Sophia's counsel pushed back hard, insisting the documents were circumstantial, the photographs inconclusive, the texts incomplete. But the judge's patience thinned. "Mrs. Hayes," he asked, "do you intend to press criminal referral?" Margaret hesitated. The room seemed to hold its breath. She looked at Daniel, who avoided her gaze, his hands clasped too tightly on the table. Then she looked at Sophia, serene and certain, as though still untouchable. She thought of Edward's words, "Quiet is where steel is forged." "I intend," Margaret said slowly, "to protect Hayes Enterprises, its employees, and its future. If that requires referral, I will not shrink from it." The judge nodded. "Then proceed. For now, the trustee remains in place. Discovery continues." That night, Margaret sat with Clara in the church, exhaustion pressing at her bones. "I saw his face, Clara," she whispered. "Daniel looked like a boy who lost his way in the woods. I wanted to hold him, to tell him it was all right. But it isn't all right." Clara touched her shoulder. "Maybe truth will free him. But you can't shield him from consequences. That's not saving, it's hiding." Margaret wiped her eyes. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to watch him fall." "Then remember," Clara said softly, "you don't watch alone. You have us. You have Edward still guiding you." 3 days later, Jonathan received a call from an unlikely source, Elise Hart. She wanted a meeting, private, off the record. Against better judgment, Margaret agreed. They met in a quiet cafe near Millennium Park. Elise arrived in a dark coat, eyes darting nervously. "I'm not here to confess," Elise said immediately. "But you should know, Sophia's not slowing down. She has another fund lined up. If she loses Hayes Enterprises, she'll pivot elsewhere. Daniel doesn't see it, but she's already building her parachute. When she's clear, she'll let him take the fall." Margaret's stomach turned. "Why tell me this?" Elise's hands shook slightly as she sipped her coffee. "Because when it unravels, I don't want to be the only one standing beside her. Consider this distance." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Will you testify if compelled?" Elise hesitated. "If compelled, yes. Voluntarily, no." "Not yet." She rose, slipping out quickly, leaving the faint smell of cinnamon and fear. Margaret sat back, heart pounding. Clara's words echoed. Truth will free him. But what if truth also destroyed him? That night, Daniel called. His voice was low, tired, stripped of bravado. "Mother, is it true? Did Sophia?" He trailed off. Margaret closed her eyes, gripping the phone. "There are things you need to see. Come to Jonathan's office tomorrow." A long silence. Then, "If this is a trick." "It isn't," she said firmly. "I'm still your mother. I would not trick you with your life." He exhaled raggedly. "Tomorrow." When the line ended, Margaret lowered the phone with trembling hands. For the first time, Daniel had reached toward her, not with anger, but with uncertainty. A door had cracked. Clara found her staring at the phone and asked quietly, "Do you think he'll walk through it?" Margaret swallowed, her voice a whisper. "I don't know. But tomorrow, truth will be waiting." The next morning, Jonathan's office felt heavier than its walls. The blinds were drawn, files neatly stacked on the mahogany desk. Margaret sat beside Clara, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Asha checked the laptop one last time, screens ready with bank trails and emails. Jonathan stood near the door, his presence steady but tense. When Daniel arrived, he looked different, less polished, more hollow. His tie hung slightly loose, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. Sophia did not accompany him. He entered quietly, avoiding his mother's gaze. "Sit," Jonathan said simply. Daniel lowered himself into the chair opposite Margaret. The silence pressed like a weight between them. Margaret's voice trembled at first, then steadied. "You asked if it was true. I want you to see for yourself." She nodded to Asha. The first document filled the screen. Northlake invoices routed to Sable Row, then into Heart Willow Holdings. Next came the bank stills of Elise and Sophia depositing checks. Finally, the text messages. Daniel's own words about the bridge loan, Sophia's reply about moving forward without a postnup. Daniel's face drained of color. "No," he whispered. "She said these were growth strategies." "She said," he broke off, pressing a hand to his forehead. "God, what have I signed?" Margaret reached across the table, her hand hovering until he let her rest it over his. "You signed what she asked because you trusted her. Just as your father feared." Daniel's eyes filled, anger and grief colliding. "She used me." Jonathan's voice was firm. "The evidence suggests Sophia siphoned funds for her own accounts. If it continues, you'll face exposure not only as a partner, but as a guarantor. Your assets, your name, even your freedom could be at risk." Daniel turned to his mother, eyes brimming. "And you knew. Father knew. That's why he gave it to you." Margaret's throat tightened. "He wanted to protect you. Even if you hated him for it. Even if you hated me." For the first time in months, Daniel's face softened. Not with trust, not yet, but with something closer to recognition. "What do I do?" "Stand with the truth," Margaret said. "Even if it costs everything else." The courtroom filled again that Friday. This time, Sophia arrived alone, her cream coat draped like armor. Daniel sat beside Margaret, silent, eyes down. When the judge called the session to order, Jonathan presented the expanded exhibits. Transfers, stills, emails, and now Elise Hart's sworn affidavit, compelled under subpoena. The affidavit confirmed Sophia's direct role in the schemes and her consultations with divorce attorneys preparing to divide Daniel's inheritance once secured. Sophia's counsel sputtered, objected, fought, but the chain was iron. The judge's gavel cut through at last. Effective immediately, Sophia Hayes is barred from involvement in Hayes Enterprises and subject to investigation for fraud. Trustee Margaret Hayes remains in full capacity. Protective measures are ordered for Daniel Hayes Jr., whose personal guarantees may be renegotiated under court supervision. Sophia rose, face pale but composed. Her eyes locked on Margaret, cold and venomous. "You think you've won," she hissed. "But power is never safe." Margaret met her gaze calmly. "Neither is greed." Sophia swept out, cameras flashing as reporters swarmed. For the first time, she looked smaller than the story she had tried to control. That evening, Margaret and Daniel sat together on the church steps, the city lights glowing across the river. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Daniel said, "I thought he didn't trust me. All this time, I thought Father betrayed me." Margaret's hand found his. "He trusted you too much. He knew love made you blind. So he asked me to see for you until you could." Daniel's shoulders shook, a sob breaking free. "I'm sorry, Mother." She pulled him close, tears spilling freely. "I'm sorry too. But now we heal. Together." Clara watched from the doorway, silent, a small smile curving her lips. Jonathan and Asha stood a few steps behind, giving them space. The battle was not over. There would be negotiations, press battles, debts to unwind. But the worst had passed. Truth had held. Weeks later, Margaret walked through Hayes Enterprises with Daniel at her side. Employees greeted her with nods of respect, some with gratitude. Daniel, quieter now, listened more than he spoke. The board treated Margaret not as a placeholder, but as the leader she had become, steady, principled, unyielding when it mattered. In her office, she hung Edward's letter in a frame, the ink steady and sure. Quiet is where steel is forged. She whispered the words like a prayer each morning before facing the day. On a warm spring afternoon, Margaret returned to the church courtyard with Clara. Children played in the grass, bells chimed in the tower. Daniel arrived later, carrying flowers for his father's grave nearby. They stood together, laying them down gently. Margaret looked up at the sky, blue and wide. "We kept it safe, Edward," she murmured. "We kept him safe." The grief would never leave her entirely, but in its place had grown something new. Strength, clarity, hope. She had endured the betrayal of her son, the schemes of a daughter-in-law, the doubts of the world. And she had not broken. She had discovered that even in her quietest self, steel had always been waiting. Thank you for walking this journey with us till the end. What part of Margaret's fight touched you most deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the stories where truth, courage, and love rise above betrayal. Until next time, remember, quiet steel lives in you too.